Ubisoft has announced that it will be shutting down the Xdefiant servers. Yeah, this kind of came out of nowhere in my opinion. If you weren't aware, Xdefiant was this like free-to-play first-person shooter video game that it featured like factions, classes. It was super fast-paced team-based matches, and it served as a tie-in to like other games in the Ubisoft universe, which I thought was super clever. Like you had factions from like The Division, Ghost Recon, Rainbow Six, and Far Cry. And what makes this story wild is we are 1 week into December, and this game launched in May of this year. So think about that for a second, right? That is 7 months that Ubisoft gave this game, and they were like, we've seen enough. Throw in the towel. And I think it definitely deserves to be said that like Ubisoft had some wild ambitions for this game. Xdefiant was originally announced back in 2021. The beta launched in 2023, and at the launch of the beta, it had more views on Twitch than Warzone, which is a massive deal in the world of content creation and live streaming. When the game launched in 2024, Xdefiant had over 1 million unique players in the first 2.5 hours of the game, setting a brand new record for all Ubisoft titles. 48 hours post-launch, the game had seen 3 million unique players and was averaging a concurrent player base of 300,000 players across all platforms. 1 month later, in June, the game had already seen over 11 million total players. And look, Call of Duty has dominated the first-person shooter space for as long as I can remember. Like, we have had people who've tried to take the crown from Call of Duty. You know, Destiny really tried. And there was a moment that I was like, man, Destiny could do it, but they really never got the PvP in place to, like, do it. Battlefield obviously has tried. Medal of Honor has tried. What was that one that Xbox came out with? That was like a first-person shooter that was made by an Asian studio. But anyway, Call of Duty's came. And everybody wants to take out Call of Duty. And I'm sure, like, internally at Ubisoft, people were seeing these initial Xdefiant numbers and were like, yo, we might be the new Call of Duty. Like, you might be looking at the new King's first-person shooting. And that's, to me, what makes this story so wild. Because we go from gangbusters in May to 7 months later, and we're shutting down the game. Now, the official Xdefiant account over on X posted about the closure this week, tweeting, I am unfortunately here today to announce that Xdefiant will be shutting down. Starting December 3rd, new downloads and player registrations will no longer be available. We will still release our Season 3 content in the future, and the servers will remain active until June 3rd of 2025, which is really interesting to me because the key takeaway from there is like no new players, right? So essentially, like, Ubisoft was faced the option of like shutting down the store and not letting anybody purchase that, which it sounds like they've already done. But number two, they're like, no new players. We're not running the risk of this game becoming more popular than it needs to be. It's a weird choice, right? Because I think the trend we're going to see following this announcement is just player counts are going to continue to dwindle and dwindle and dwindle, especially without having like new players in the holiday season coming to try the game. You think about all the new PlayStation owners and Xbox owners that are getting consoles this year under the tree or from Santa, and you got to question, like, would Xdefiant have had a surge of popularity there? Now, this announcement led a lot of players to start asking the question of being like, well, am I going to get refunded? Like, what about all the money I've invested into this game? And to Ubisoft's credit, they did reveal that any purchases made in the last 30 days in Xdefiant will be refunded, and players who purchased the Ultimate Founder Packs would receive a full refund. But again, I'm sitting here, like, this news dropped earlier this week, and as I'm researching this game and talking about this story, the more and more I talk about it, the more I wonder, like, what the hell happened? What happened to Xdefiant? But what makes this even weirder is that, like, at the end of the announcement of the closure, Ubisoft and Xdefiant kind of closed out the message by saying, free-to-play in particular is a long journey. Many free-to-play games take a long time to find their footing and become profitable. It's a long journey that Ubisoft and the teams working on the games were prepared to make until very recently. But unfortunately, the journey became too much to sensibly continue. And that statement at the end of this announcement makes me believe that, like, boy, there is some internal drama going on behind the scenes right now at Ubisoft, because to me, that sounds like a message from the developers being like, we didn't want to shut this down, Ubisoft shut this down. And God, I don't know how that got approved through the like PR and like everybody who reviews those things, because that's such a bad light. And look, I did do some digging here. I mean, the game did see a dip in the player base in August. The concurrent player count had hit 20,000 total players, which look, isn't great, but at the same time, like I would say it's not terrible, right? Like I know there are thousands of developers out there who are releasing their games on Steam that if they were like, yo, I've got 20,000 people playing this game every single month, yo, sign me up. It's the same concept with like Rooster Teeth. I read that when Rooster Teeth shut down, they had something like 300,000 or 200,000 monthly members that were paying like $9.99 a month. And I'm like, why would you shut that down? You could scale back, you could operate within that. And I'm like, man, 20,000 is a lot of people to get rid of. And granted, in the world of Call of Duty, that's literally drops in a bucket to Call of Duty, but 20,000 is a lot of players that are still dedicated to your game 7 months after it launches. So really interesting. But like they said, I mean, free-to-play games take time. And it goes through waves, right? You see games gain popularity, and then a new update comes out, and the popularity comes back, and then it drops down, and it pops up. And it just doesn't sound like Ubisoft was really willing to take this journey, even though like Ubisoft San Francisco very much wanted to. And clearly that's the case, because following this announcement, Ubisoft revealed that its Ubisoft San Francisco and Ubisoft Osaka studios would be shuttered, impacting about 277 developers that worked on Xdefiant. Now, some of those developers will be transferred to like other games, but it's just like, I don't understand this. And maybe this is where like the sports world analogy comes in, because I feel like if Ubisoft would have been willing to sell the Xdefiant property and like sell it to someone else, somebody would have taken it. Like, would Sony have been like, you're telling me you have 20,000 players? Sure, I'll take it. Give it to me. We'll fund this. Or Xbox would fund this. And I don't, again, guy in his garage talking about video games. I don't know if those conversations happen behind the scenes, but I feel like that's better than laying off 277 people. Now, the CEO of Ubisoft, Yves Guillemot, did put out an internal memo that was obtained by Insider Gaming. And just some of the key points here, I'm not going to dive into the entire thing because it is very long. Yves did say the announcement by Maurice Sophie regarding the discontinuation of Xdefiant, the closure of the San Francisco and Osaka studios, and the ramp down of the Sydney production site is among the difficult decisions that we had to make. I want to take this opportunity to pay tribute to the tremendous work done by the Xdefiant team. Their goal was to challenge the best shooter on the market, but despite the intensity of their efforts, it was not enough. I am well aware that given the current context, such announcements may worry you, and that's understandable. The entire industry is facing similar difficult decisions, yet often the scale of the impact is much larger. Our organization has allowed us to limit the impact of these kind of decisions and make more targeted restructurings, and all our efforts are focused on trying to maintain the course and philosophy. We will continue working on evolving our organization to adapt it to market changes and with a long-term perspective in mind. And I think really like the message here is, number one, this sucks for Xdefiant fans, right? Like the game you love, it's no longer going to be available halfway through next year. And really, like, my condolences go out to you guys. Like, that sucks. I've been there. I've played games, and it's like, oh, well, this game's gone. Can never play it again in my life. But I also think, like, the flip side of this is with Xdefiant being shut down and Ubisoft shutting down studios, the pressure that is on Assassin's Creed Shadows to be a very good game is becoming very apparent. And I got to imagine that Ubisoft is like, yeah, this game is already facing backlash and it's not even out yet. So we're going to take all the time that it takes to make sure that Assassin's Creed Shadows is the best game possible. Because if that game bombs, dear God, I genuinely don't know what the future of Ubisoft has. Because that Assassin's Creed is kind of always like their bread and butter, right? That's the game that generates a lot of revenue for that company. And you've seen the controversy. You know that there's been backlash to Shadows. So it's like, what's going on? Like 2025 is going to be such an interesting year for Ubisoft. And I mean, it also gets you wondering, right? Like, what does that future in 2025 look like? Like, I constantly see people over on X who are like, oh, this just in, Xbox is going to acquire PlayStation, or I just heard that PlayStation is going to buy Ubisoft. And it's just like, you always look at those and you're like, Okay, bud. Yeah, well, I'll believe it when I see it. But now that, like, you're seeing the troubles that Ubisoft is having, and, like, the woes, and the layoffs, and the shutdowns, and the closures, and you're just like, are these weirdos right? Are the people speculating on Twitter that Xbox might buy Ubisoft or PlayStation might buy Ubisoft, in a year or 2 years, are we going to look back and be like, Nostradamus over here? They predicted it 2 years in advance. But, again, just a wild story. I mean, the game clearly had a bright future, in my opinion. You could build off the success at the launch, and games go through their dips and highs. And I'm just like, God, I feel like Ubisoft pulled the plug too soon. But again, at least it wasn't like Concord. I mean, Concord was a premium game where PlayStation pulled the game within like 2 weeks. So the fact that they gave the game the ability to cook at least, you know, and I'm not talking like a 4-course meal. I mean, Ubisoft gave like instant rice cook for Xdefiant, but like at least we got to see the game have a couple seasons.